Millionaire CEO froze when he saw his son kicked out like a servant. What he did next was shocking. A millionaire CEO's world shattered in 3 seconds when he saw his own son treated like trash. The man who controlled billion-dollar deals, who made grown executives tremble with a single glance, stood frozen as his heart crumbled into pieces. This wasn't just any random worker being humiliated. This was his flesh and blood, reduced to nothing more than disposable help. Have you ever witnessed a moment that changed everything? A single scene that revealed the ugly truth about someone you trusted? Maybe it was catching a friend spreading lies about you, or discovering your partner's betrayal through a text message. That gut-wrenching instant when reality hits you like a freight train, when everything you believed was built on lies. Tonight, Caspian Velmont would discover that his family's destruction wasn't an accident. It was a carefully calculated betrayal. For 5 years, he carried the weight of believing his son was a thief, a disappointment, a stain on the family name. But in this one devastating moment, watching his boy being dragged out like garbage, the truth will begin to surface. But what he did next would shock even his enemies. The Velmont Grand Hotel's ballroom glittered like a jewel box designed for gods. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's houses hung from soaring ceilings, casting rainbow prisms across marble floors so polished you could see your reflection. The soft melody of a grand piano drifted through air thick with expensive perfume, and the murmur of conversations that moved millions of dollars with casual words. This wasn't just a party. This was a display of raw power. Caspian Velmont commanded the room without even trying. At 62, his silver hair was perfectly styled, his custom Italian suit fit like liquid silk, and his presence made everyone else feel like they were borrowing space in his world. He'd built his empire one ruthless deal at a time, turning abandoned lots into luxury developments, transforming rundown neighborhoods into cold playgrounds for the wealthy. The guests who surrounded him weren't just rich. They were the kind of rich that bought politicians like groceries. Oil executives, tech moguls, media titans, all of them hanging on his every word, desperately hoping for scraps from his table. But even kings have broken kingdoms. His daughter Isolde had fled to Paris years ago, choosing her fashion career over family fortune. His son Dorian smiled and charmed investors by day, then drowned his demons in bottles and pills by night. His youngest, Evangeline, had stormed out hours earlier, disgusted by the shallow waste of it all. Caspian raised his champagne glass, the crystal catching the light like liquid diamonds. To another year of unprecedented growth, he announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom. The crowd erupted in applause, but the sound felt hollow, mechanical. That's when he saw him, moving through the crowd of servers, balancing a silver tray with shaking hands. Was a young man with dark hair and eyes that Caspian recognized like looking into a mirror from 30 years ago. The boy, no, man now, wore a crisp white shirt and black vest, the uniform of hired help, invisible to the guests who demanded refills and appetizers. Time stopped. The champagne glass slipped from Caspian's fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. His throat closed, his chest tightened, and for the first time in decades, the great Caspian Velmont felt powerless. Elias, his son, his abandoned son, the boy he'd thrown out 5 years ago, believing he was a thief who'd stolen from the family business. The son he called a disgrace, a disappointment, a mistake that needed to be erased from the Velmont legacy. But here Elias was, reduced to serving drinks to people who wouldn't notice if he disappeared forever. Caspian's legs felt like concrete as he pushed through the crowd, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to reach him, had to crash. A heavy crystal vase exploded against the floor near Elias's feet, sending shards flying like deadly confetti. The crowd gasped and stepped back, forming a circle around the mess. But before anyone could react, a massive security guard appeared, his hand clamping down on Elias's shoulder like a vice. "You clumsy fool," the guard growled, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. "Can't even carry a tray without causing destruction." "I didn't..." Elias started, but the guard wasn't listening. "This is over," the man snarled, his grip tightening. We don't tolerate screw-ups from bottom feeders like you. What happened next made Caspian's blood run cold. The guard grabbed Elias by the arm and began dragging him toward the exit, like he was nothing more than trash to be disposed of. The distinguished guests watched with detached curiosity, some even smirking at the entertainment. His son, his flesh and blood, was being humiliated in front of hundreds of people who treated him like he was less than human. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that like button, because this story gets much darker, and what this father discovers will make your blood boil. But this wasn't just any servant being mistreated. This was his son, the boy he'd abandoned 5 years ago. Caspian stood frozen as the security guard dragged Elias toward the exit. His son's face a mask of humiliation and rage. The ballroom continued its celebration around them, oblivious to the destruction happening in plain sight. Wine glasses clinked, laughter echoed off marble walls, and the piano played on while a father's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The memories hit him like a sledgehammer. 5 years earlier, Velmont Holdings boardroom. The money's gone, Dad. $2 million transferred out of the development fund. 23-year-old Elias had stood before his father's mahogany desk, his hands trembling as he held the bank statements. Someone's been siphoning funds for months. Caspian had looked up from his laptop, his face stone cold. Who had access to those accounts? Only 3 people. You, me, and... Elias swallowed hard. Victoria Velmont, Caspian's second wife, had entered the room at that exact moment. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her red lips curved in what looked like concern. What's all this shouting about? Someone's been stealing from the company, Caspian said, his voice deadly quiet. Victoria's eyes widened in shock. How terrible. Who would do such a thing? That's when she produced the evidence that destroyed everything. I found these in Elias's room this morning, she said, her voice dripping with false sorrow. She placed a stack of documents on the desk. Transfer authorizations, account numbers, withdrawal slips, all bearing Elias's forged signature. I didn't sign those. Elias had shouted, his face going white. Victoria, you know I didn't. I'm sorry, sweetheart, she whispered, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder. But the evidence speaks for itself. Caspian's world had crumbled. The son he groomed to inherit his empire, the boy he'd taught to ride bikes and throw footballs, had apparently betrayed everything they built together. Get out, Caspian had said, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, please. Get out. The roar echoed through the boardroom, through the hallways, through Elias's soul. You're no son of mine. Don't ever come back. Present day, outside the Velmont Grand Hotel, the cold rain had started falling by the time Caspian pushed through the hotel's back exit. His expensive suit was soaked within seconds, but he didn't care. He found Elias sitting on the curb, his server's uniform clinging to his thin frame, a cigarette burning between his fingers. Elias. His son looked up, and Caspian saw 5 years of pain carved into features that had once been soft with youth. Elias's eyes were hollow, his cheeks gaunt, his hands scarred from whatever jobs he'd been forced to take just to survive. What do you want? Elias's voice was a gravelly whisper, aged beyond his 28 years. I didn't know you were working here. Elias laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course you didn't. You made it clear I was dead to you. The rain poured harder, washing away the carefully maintained facade both men had worn for years. Caspian stepped closer, and for the first time, he really looked at his son. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by thrift store finds. The confident posture had been broken down by years of rejection and struggle. I believed you were guilty, Caspian said finally. I know. Elias took a long drag from his cigarette. Victoria made sure of that. Those 4 words hung in the air like a death sentence. Caspian felt his knees weaken. What do you mean? She framed me, Dad. Perfectly. Completely. And you believed her instead of your own son. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Caspian staggered backward, his mind racing. That's impossible. I saw the evidence. You saw what she wanted you to see. Elias stood up, flicking his cigarette into the gutter. She needed me gone so her precious stepson could inherit everything. And you were so eager to believe the worst about me that you didn't even question it. Elias, Save it. His son's voice was ice. I spent 2 years trying to prove my innocence. 2 years of having doors slammed in my face because word got out that I was a thief. 2 years of sleeping in my car because no one would hire the disgraced Velmont heir. Each word was a knife twisting in Caspian's chest. I'm sorry. Sorry. Elias stepped closer, and Caspian saw the fury burning in his eyes. You threw me away like garbage. You chose a woman you'd known for 3 years over the son you'd raised for 23. And now you're sorry. The rain continued to fall, washing away tears neither man would admit to shedding. 5 years of silence, of pain, of a family destroyed by lies and betrayal. Caspian reached out, desperate to bridge the gap, but Elias stepped back. Don't touch me. You lost that right the day you called me a disappointment and told me to never come back. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. Elias's voice cracked. It was easier to believe I was a problem than to admit you'd married a woman who was playing you like a chess game. But here's where the story takes a deadly turn. As Elias turned to walk away, disappearing into the rain-soaked night, Caspian made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't just let his son vanish again. He would find the truth, no matter what it cost him. And what he discovered in Victoria's carefully hidden secrets will be more devastating than anything he could have imagined. Comment below if you think Caspian deserved this karma, because what happens next will change your mind about everything you thought you knew about this family. What Caspian discovered in those dusty files would destroy everything he thought he knew about his family. The rain had stopped, but Caspian stood in the empty alley for another hour, his son's words echoing in his mind. She framed me, Dad. Perfectly. Completely. Those accusations couldn't be true. Could they? By 3 a.m., Caspian was sitting in his home office, surrounded by boxes he hadn't opened in years. Bank records, security footage, employee files. Everything from that devastating week 5 years ago when his world had collapsed. His hands shook as he pulled out the first folder. The transfer authorizations looked exactly as he remembered. Elias's signature, clear as day. $2 million moved from the development fund to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But something nagged at him, a detail his grief-stricken mind had missed the first time. He grabbed a magnifying glass and studied the signatures closely. The handwriting was perfect, too perfect. Every loop, every curve was identical across multiple documents. Real signatures have natural variations, tiny imperfections that make them unique. These were copies, forgeries. His blood ran cold. Caspian's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard, accessing the company's digital archives. The timestamp on the transfer showed they'd been authorized at 2:47 a.m. on March 15th. But the security log showed Elias had left the building at 8:30 p.m. the night before, and his key card hadn't been used to re-enter. Someone else had been in that office. He pulled up the security footage from that night, fast-forwarding through empty hallways until he found what he was looking for. At 2:43 a.m., a figure in a black coat and baseball cap entered the building using an executive key card. The person moved confidently through the halls, knowing exactly where the cameras were positioned. At 2:55 a.m., the same figure emerged from Caspian's office and walked straight to the elevator. For just a moment, they turned toward the camera, and Caspian's heart stopped. Even with the cap pulled low, he recognized those lips, that jawline, those movements. Victoria, with trembling fingers, he rewound the footage and watched it again. His wife, the woman who'd comforted him through his betrayal by his son, had been the one making the transfers. She'd use her own key card, thinking no one would ever check. But there was more. Caspian dove deeper into financial records, following a trail of breadcrumbs that led to a horrifying discovery. The offshore account wasn't random. It was connected to a shell company called Meridian Holdings, a company that, according to the corporate filings, was owned by Victoria's brother Marcus. The money had never been stolen. It had been moved to Victoria's family, with her as the inside connection. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely type. He accessed Victoria's email account. She'd never changed the password from their anniversary date, arrogant in her certainty that she'd never be caught. The emails painted a picture of calculated cruelty that made his stomach turn. Phase 1 complete. The documents are planted in E's room. She will find them tomorrow. March 14th. He bought it completely. E is officially disowned. M can now take his place in company. March 16th. The weak fool actually cried when he threw his son out. This was easier than I thought. March 18th. Each message was a dagger to his heart. But the final email, sent just last week, was the most damning. 5 years later, and she still has no idea. E is working as a server at his own family's hotel. Perfect poetic justice for Brad, who thought he deserved everything handed to him. Caspian's vision blurred with rage. Victoria hadn't just framed his son. She'd been watching him suffer, enjoying every moment of his humiliation. She'd known Elias was working at the hotel. She'd probably arranged it. The office door opened and Victoria glided in wearing a silk robe, her blonde hair perfect even at 4 a.m. "Darling, what are you doing up so late? You'll make yourself sick." Caspian slowly turned his laptop screen toward her. The email thread was displayed in full, her words glowing on the screen like an indictment. Victoria's face went white, then hardened into something he'd never seen before. The loving wife mask slipped away, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice steady. "I just found out tonight, after I watched my son get dragged out of our hotel like trash." Victoria shrugged, pouring herself a glass of wine from the bar cart. He was in the way. Marcus needed that position, and Elias was too much of a threat. He was my son. He was a liability. She took a sip of wine, completely unmoved by his anguish. You were getting soft, talking about early retirement, handing everything over to him. I couldn't let that happen. Caspian stood up, his chair crashing backward. "You destroyed my family. You made me throw away my own child." "I made you stronger," Victoria said coldly. "Without the distraction of that weak boy, you built the company into something magnificent. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you?" Caspian's voice was deadly quiet. "You stole from me. You manipulated me. You destroyed my relationship with my son. I saved your legacy from a spoiled brat who would have run it into the ground." The casual cruelty in her voice was the final straw. Caspian grabbed the printed emails and threw them at her feet. "Get out. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. I never want to see you again." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You can't survive without me, Caspian. I know all your secrets, all your weaknesses. Try to divorce me and I'll destroy you. You already have." He picked up his phone. "I'm calling my lawyer. By morning, every asset will be frozen. Every account will be seized. You'll get nothing." For the first time, fear flickered across Victoria's face. "You wouldn't dare. Watch me." Caspian's finger hovered over the call button. "You have 1 hour to pack whatever you can carry. After that, security will escort you out." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You're making a mistake. That pathetic boy will never forgive you. You'll be alone. I'd rather be alone than live a monster." She slammed the wine glass down, shattering it against the marble counter. "Fine, but remember this, Caspian. You're the one who chose to believe I was capable of this. You're the one who threw your son away without a second thought. The guilt is yours to carry." With that, she stormed out, leaving Caspian alone with the wreckage of 5 years of lies. A man who built an empire was now realizing he'd been played by his own wife like a puppet on strings. But his next move would prove that even the deepest betrayals can be overcome. Share this video if you believe the truth always comes out, because his father's next move was legendary. But knowing the truth and earning forgiveness are two completely different battles. Victoria's absence left the penthouse feeling hollow, but Caspian knew the real emptiness wasn't in his home. It was in his heart. He had the evidence, the proof of his son's innocence. But what good was vindication when the damage had already been done? 5 years of believing the worst about Elias had created a chasm that might be impossible to bridge. The next morning, Caspian stood outside a rundown apartment building in the city's industrial district. The paint was peeling, the windows were barred, and the smell of garbage hung heavy in the air. This was where his son lived now, where the heir to $1 billion empire had been forced to exist. He knocked on apartment 3B. No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. "Elias, I know you're in there. We need to talk." The door finally opened, revealing his son in a stained t-shirt and worn jeans. Elias looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, several days of stubble, the hollow look of someone who'd stopped hoping for better. "What do you want?" Elias's voice was flat, emotionless. "I know the truth about Victoria, about what she did to you." Elias stared at him for a long moment, then started to close the door. Too late. Caspian jammed his foot in the doorway. "It's not too late. I have proof." "Proof?" Elias laughed bitterly. "Where was your need for proof 5 years ago, when you threw me out like garbage? I was wrong. I was manipulated, and I was wrong. You were weak." Elias's eyes blazed with fury. "You chose to believe a woman you'd known for 3 years over your own son. That's not manipulation, that's character." The words hit like physical blows, but Caspian didn't back down. "You're right. I failed you, but I want to make it right." "Make it right?" Elias stepped closer, and Caspian could see the pain radiating from every pore. "You want to make 5 years of hell, right? 5 years of people treating me like a criminal? 5 years of wondering if my own father ever loved me at all. I did love you. I do love you." "No." Elias shook his head. "You loved the idea of me, the perfect son who would inherit your empire and make you proud. But the moment I became inconvenient, you discarded me." Caspian tried to speak, but Elias held up a hand. "I don't want your money. I don't want your apologies. I want you to leave me alone." The door slammed shut, leaving Caspian alone in the hallway. For weeks, Caspian tried everything. He sent letters that came back unopened. He left packages outside Elias's door, clothes, food, even a new laptop, all of which disappeared but were never acknowledged. He deposited money into bank accounts that Elias never touched. Every attempt at contact was met with silence. But Caspian was nothing if not persistent. He hired a private investigator to learn about his son's life, not to intrude, but to understand. What he discovered broke his heart even further. Elias worked 3 jobs just to afford that terrible apartment. Days at construction site, evenings at the hotel where Caspian had first seen him, and nights at a 24-hour diner washing dishes. He applied to dozens of companies in his field, business management, finance development, but word had spread through the industry. The Velmont name was poison when attached to scandal. Yet somehow, impossibly, Elias had found a way to survive. The investigators' report mentioned something else. Late-night visits to a converted warehouse in the tech district. Curious, Caspian drove there himself one Thursday evening, parking across the street to watch. At 11 p.m., Elias emerged from the building, but he wasn't alone. A group of young people followed him. Programmers, developers, designers. They were laughing, energized, talking excitedly about code and algorithms, and something called revolutionary user interface. Caspian's heart skipped. His son was building something. The next night, he followed them to a 24-hour coffee shop, where the group spread laptops and tablets across 3 tables, working with the focused intensity of people who believed they were changing the world. Elias sat at the center, not just participating, but clearly leading. This wasn't the broken victim Caspian had expected. This was a man who'd taken his exile and transformed it into opportunity. 2 months later, midnight, Caspian had been watching the warehouse for weeks, learning the patterns. He knew Elias usually stayed late on Fridays, working alone after the others went home. Tonight, he finally worked up the courage to go inside. The warehouse was divided into workstations, each equipped with high-end computers and development tools. Whiteboards covered the walls, filled with diagrams and code snippets. In the center of it all sat Elias, hunched over a laptop, completely absorbed in his work. "Hello, son." Elias looked up, his face cycling through surprise, anger, and resignation. "How did you find me?" "I've been watching, learning about what you've built here." Caspian gestured around the space. "It's impressive. Don't patronize me." "I'm not." Caspian pulled up a chair uninvited. "I'm in awe. You took nothing and created something extraordinary." Elias saved his work and closed the laptop. "What do you want?" "I want to understand. What is this place? What are you building?" For a moment, Elias said nothing. Then, perhaps because he was tired, perhaps because he was lonely, he began to talk. "It's a platform for small businesses to compete with corporate giants. Direct access to consumers, cutting out the middlemen who take advantage of people who can't afford lawyers and marketing teams." His voice grew stronger as he spoke. "Everything I learned about business, everything you taught me before everything fell apart, I'm using it to help people like me. People who've been thrown away." Caspian felt tears prick his eyes. "You're helping the underdogs. I'm helping people who deserve better than they've been given." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. "The platform launches in 6 months," Elias continued. "We already have backing from 3 venture capital firms. Small firms, not the giants who wouldn't touch me because of my name, but companies that believe in what we're doing." "How much do you need?" "I don't want your money. Not as your father. As an investor." Caspian leaned forward. "What you're building, it's not just noble, it's smart. The market is ready for disruption, and your position perfectly provided." Elias studied his father's face, searching for deception, for manipulation. "Why would you want to invest in me?" "Because you're brilliant, because you're right, and because—" Caspian's voice broke slightly. "Because I'm proud of you, prouder than I've ever been." Something shifted in Elias's expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. "I can't promise I'll ever forgive you," he said quietly. "I know, but maybe we can start with business." They worked together until dawn, Caspian offering insights from decades of experience while Elias shared his vision for the future. For the first time in 5 years, they were father and son again, if only for a few hours. Then came the day that would shock the entire business world. No one saw this coming, not the board, not the media, not even his own family. The relationship between Caspian and Elias had slowly transformed over the following months. What began as late-night business conversations had evolved into something resembling trust. Elias's platform had launched successfully, already disrupting 3 major industries and generating millions in revenue. More importantly, the son who'd been branded a failure was proving himself to be a visionary leader. But nobody expected what happened next. The annual Velmont Holdings shareholders meeting was corporate theater at its finest. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, not the Velmont Grand, for obvious reasons, buzzed with the energy of money and power. 400 of the wealthiest investors in the country had gathered to hear Caspian's annual address, expecting the usual reports of record profits and expansion plans. The room was divided into distinct territories. Investment firms occupied the front rows, their representatives in identical Navy suits clutching tablets and legal pads. Family members sat in a reserved section to the right. Isolde had flown in from Paris. Dorian was fidgeting with his phone, and Evangeline sat with her arms crossed, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. In the back corner, barely visible, sat Marcus Henley, Victoria's son from her first marriage. At 35, he'd been quietly groomed as Caspian's heir apparent after Elias's exile. His custom suit couldn't hide the nervous energy radiating from him. Tonight was supposed to be his official coronation as chief operating officer, the final step before eventually taking over the company. What Marcus didn't know was that Caspian had made a very different decision. The lights dimmed and Caspian took the stage. At 62, he still commanded respect. His silver hair perfectly styled, his posture straight and confident. But those who knew him well might have noticed something different in his eyes. A weight had been lifted, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, he began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. Thank you for joining me for what has been a year of unprecedented growth and transformation. The crowd settled into comfortable attention. They'd heard this speech before: profits up, expansion successful, bright future ahead. Standard corporate rhetoric. Velmont Holdings has achieved record revenues of $2.8 billion this fiscal year. Caspian continued. Our real estate division has completed 17 major developments across 3 countries. Our hospitality group has opened 12 new properties. By every metric, we are more successful than we've ever been. Polite applause rippled through the audience. Marcus shifted in his seat, waiting for his moment. But success in business means nothing without success in life, Caspian said, his tone shifting. And I've learned that the most important deals aren't made in boardrooms. They're made in the hearts of the people we love. The room grew quieter. This wasn't the usual corporate speak. 5 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life. I allowed fear, manipulation, and pride to destroy my relationship with my eldest son. I threw away the most important thing I had, my family, because I was too arrogant to see the truth. Murmurs began to spread through the crowd. Board members exchanged glances. This was definitely not in the prepared remarks. Many of you know the story. You know about the scandal, the accusations, the exile. What you don't know is that my son was innocent. Completely, unequivocally innocent. The evidence against him was fabricated by someone I trusted, someone who used my love for them to destroy the person I should have protected above all else. The murmurs grew louder. Marcus's face had gone pale. In the 5 years since I abandoned him, my son has built something extraordinary. Without my money, without my name, without my help, he created a technology company that's already changing entire industries. He took nothing and made everything. He proved that the Velmont legacy isn't about inheritance. It's about innovation, determination, and the courage to rebuild when the world tears you down. Caspian paused, letting the words sink in. The ballroom was dead silent now, which brings me to tonight's announcement. He took a deep breath. Effective immediately, I am resigning as CEO of Velmont Holdings. The silence shattered. Gasps echoed through the room. Board members sat up straighter. Investors grabbed their phones. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Furthermore, Caspian continued, his voice growing stronger, I am recommending to the board that my successor be someone who has proven himself capable of building empires from nothing. Someone who understands that true leadership isn't about controlling people. It's about empowering them. Someone who has earned this position through merit, not birthright. The room held its collective breath. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the new CEO of Velmont Holdings, my son, Elias Velmont. The explosion of sound was deafening. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Board members were on their feet, some applauding, others looking stunned. Marcus sat frozen, his carefully planned future crumbling around him. But all eyes turned to the back of the room, where Elias stood up slowly from a seat most people hadn't even noticed. He was wearing a simple navy suit, not the expensive tailored creation his father preferred, but something that spoke to his journey from exile to redemption. As he walked toward the stage, the crowd gradually quieted. This was the son who'd been branded a thief, the heir who'd been disinherited. the man who disappeared into obscurity. Now he was walking back into the spotlight, not as a returning prince, but as someone who'd earned his crown through his own efforts. Elias reached the podium and stood beside his father. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. 5 years of pain, anger, and separation hung between them. Then, slowly, Elias extended his hand. Caspian took it, and the room erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. When the noise finally died down, Elias stepped to the microphone. "I accept this position," he said, his voice steady and clear. "But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about fairy tale endings. This is about proving that people can change, that families can heal, and that the greatest strength comes from acknowledging your mistakes and working to fix them." He looked directly at his father. "I'm not ready to forgive yet, but I'm ready to move forward. Together." The crowd rose as one, applauding not just a business decision, but a moment of raw human truth. In the reserve family section, Isolde was crying. Dorian had put away his phone and was actually paying attention. Even Evangeline was nodding approvingly. But it was Caspian's face that told the real story. The man who'd built an empire on ruthless ambition was finally learning what it meant to be truly wealthy. The gasps, the stunned silence, the thunderous applause that followed. It was more than a corporate announcement. It was a father publicly choosing his son over his pride, and a son choosing hope over hatred. The most powerful moment came when father and son embraced on stage, and for the first time in 5 years, both men allowed themselves to believe that some wounds could actually heal. But the real transformation was just beginning. The media storm that followed the shareholders' meeting was unlike anything the business world had seen. Exiled son returns to claim empire, dominated headline for weeks. But inside the Velmont family, something more profound was happening. Something that couldn't be captured in newspaper articles or television interviews. 3 days after the announcement, Elias sat in his father's old office, now his office, staring at the mountain of documents that came with running a billion-dollar corporation. The weight of responsibility was crushing, but it wasn't the business decisions that kept him awake at night. It was the family decisions. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Isolde entered, her long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a sweater. She looked younger somehow, less guarded. "I brought coffee," she said, setting a cup on his desk. "The good stuff from that little place in Montmartre." "You flew coffee back from Paris?" "I flew myself back from Paris." She sat down across from him, permanently. Elias studied his sister's face. "Why?" "Because I've been running away for 6 years, and I'm tired of running." Isolde's voice was quiet but steady. "When I saw what happened to you, how Dad just discarded you, I couldn't stay. I couldn't pretend we were a normal family. And now I want to help fix what's broken." She pulled out a folder. "I've been working on a concept, a fashion line that partners with your tech platform. Sustainable clothing, direct from designers to consumers, cutting out the corporate middlemen who exploit workers." Elias flipped through the sketches and business plans. They were brilliant, socially conscious, and perfectly aligned with his platform's mission. "This is incredible work," Isolde. "I want to come home," she said simply. "Not to the family business, but to the family. If we're going to heal, we need to do it together." The conversation with Dorian was harder. Elias found his brother in the garden behind the family estate, sitting on a bench with a glass of what looked like whiskey, but smelled like water. Sparkling water. Dorian said without looking up, "Day 47. 47 days sober? 47 days of trying to remember who I was before I started drowning in bottles." Dorian's voice was hoarse, like he'd been screaming. "I watched Dad throw you away, and instead of fighting for you, I just disappeared into the bottom of every glass I could find." Elias sat down beside his brother. "I never blamed you for that." "I blame me." Dorian finally looked at him, and Elias saw the toll the last 5 years had taken. "I knew Dad was wrong. I knew you'd never steal from a family. but I was too much of a coward to speak up. You were protecting yourself. I was protecting my inheritance. The honesty in Dorian's voice was brutal. I thought if you were gone, I'd get a bigger piece of the empire. I was selfish and weak, and I've been poisoning myself with guilt ever since. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the garden in shades of gold and red. I'm in rehab, Dorian said finally. Real rehab, not the spa retreats Dad used to pay for. I'm learning to deal with my problems instead of drowning them. Good. I also met someone there, a therapist named Dr. Sarah Chun. She's helping me understand that addiction isn't just about substances. It's about filling holes in your soul with things that can't actually fill them. Elias smiled. Sounds like a smart woman. She is. And she's helping me figure out how to earn forgiveness, starting with forgiving myself. Dorian stood up. I want to work with you, but not in the business. I want to use my restaurants to create jobs for people in recovery. Give them a chance to rebuild their lives the way I'm rebuilding mine. You don't need my permission for that. I need your blessing. I need to know that my brother doesn't hate me for being a coward when he needed me most. Elias stood and pulled Dorian into a hug. I don't hate you. I never could. Evangeline's approach was typically direct. She stormed into Elias's office the following week, dropped a thick proposal on his desk, and crossed her arms. Housing, she said without preamble. Your platform connects small businesses with consumers. I want to create a division that connects displaced families with affordable housing. That's a massive undertaking. So is building a tech company from nothing. She leaned forward. The same systems that drove you out of our family drive millions of people out of their homes every year. Bureaucracy, corruption, powerful people protecting their own interests while the powerless suffer. Elias flipped through the proposal. It was comprehensive, well-researched, and passionate. This would cost millions. We have millions. More importantly, we have influence. We can force change instead of just profiting from the status quo. And if it fails, then we fail doing something meaningful instead of succeeding at something hollow. Evangeline's eyes blazed with the same intensity their father had once brought to business deals. I've been fighting these battles alone for years. I want to fight them with my family. The first family dinner in 5 years happened on a Tuesday evening in October. No servants, no formal dining room. Just the 5 of them around the kitchen table, sharing takeout Chinese food and tentative conversation. Caspian looked older, his silver hair showing streaks of white, his face lined with the weight of his mistakes. But his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. I've been thinking about what comes next, he said, setting down his chopsticks. Not for the business, but for me. I've spent 40 years building an empire, and I forgot to build a family. So what will you do? Isolde asked. I want to teach. Not business school. I want to work with young entrepreneurs who are trying to build something meaningful. People like... He looked at Elias. People like you were when you started over. Dad, I'm not asking for forgiveness, Caspian interrupted. I'm asking for the chance to earn it. Every day, for however long it takes. Elias set down his food and looked around the table. His sister, back from exile and ready to fight for change. His brother, facing his demons and winning. His younger sister, channeling her idealism into action. His father, humbled but not broken. We're all pretty messed up, he said finally. Completely, Dorian agreed. But we're messed up together, Evangeline added. Together, Isolde nodded. Caspian reached across the table and placed his hand over his son's. Together, the healing wasn't instant. There were still arguments, still moments of pain and mistrust. But slowly, day by day, conversation by conversation, the Velmont family began to remember what it meant to be a family instead of just a business arrangement. And in the quiet moments, when Elias and Caspian worked side by side on a project, when Isolde showed Dorian her new designs, When Evangeline shared her victories with people who finally understood her passion, they discovered that the most valuable thing they'd ever built together wasn't an empire. It was trust. This story proves that even the most broken families can heal, but only if they're willing to face the truth and fight for each other. 1 year later, Velmont Holdings headquarters, rooftop garden, the city stretched out below them like a constellation of possibilities. Elias stood at the edge of the rooftop, his tie loosened after another 18-hour day, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of hope. The company had not only survived his leadership, it had thrived. The integration of his tech platform with the traditional business had created something unprecedented, a corporation that actually cared about the people it served. Caspian joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee instead of champagne. At 63, he moved with less urgency but more purpose. His days of empire building were behind him, replaced by something more valuable: the quiet satisfaction of watching his children become who they were meant to be. "The quarterly reports look good," Caspian said, handing Elias a cup. "They look better than good. We're changing entire industries." "You're changing entire industries." "I'm just learning how to be a father." They stood in comfortable silence, something that would have been impossible 2 years ago. The anger had faded, replaced by understanding. The hurt remained, but it no longer controlled them. "Do you think she knew?" Elias asked suddenly. "Victoria, do you think she knew that destroying our family would actually make us stronger?" Caspian considered this. "I think she knew exactly what she was doing. She just didn't count on you being strong enough to survive it. I almost wasn't, but you were. That's what matters." Below them, the city hummed with life. Somewhere in those buildings, families were having dinner together. Somewhere else, a father was making the same mistakes Caspian had made. Somewhere, a son was learning to forgive. "I forgive you," Elias said quietly. The words hung in the air like a gift. Caspian's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. "I don't deserve it." Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to move forward instead of staying trapped in the past. "When did you become so wise?" "When I realized that holding on to anger was just another prison." Elias turned to face his father. "I spent 5 years hating you. 5 years letting your betrayal define who I was. But hatred didn't make me stronger. It made me smaller. So what changed? I realized that the man who threw me out wasn't the real you. He was a broken version of you, manipulated by someone who knew exactly which buttons to push. The real you is the man who spent months investigating the truth. The real you is the man who gave up everything to make things right." Caspian wiped his eyes. "I love you, son. I love you too, Dad." The embrace they shared was different from the one on stage a year ago. That one had been about forgiveness. This one was about healing. The life lessons from this story are universal and powerful. Taking responsibility for your mistakes isn't about punishment. It's about freedom. Caspian could have made excuses, blamed Victoria, or justified his actions. Instead, he owned his failures completely. Only by accepting full responsibility was he able to begin the work of making amends. Truth will always surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. Victoria's lies seem perfect, but lies require constant maintenance. Truth, on the other hand, has a way of fighting back. When someone consistently chooses deception over honesty, they're building a house of cards that will eventually collapse. Genuine redemption requires action, not just words. Saying sorry is easy. Caspian proved his remorse by investigating the truth, confronting Victoria, giving up his position, and spending months earning back trust. Real change is measured in consistent behavior over time. Family bonds can survive even the deepest betrayals, if both sides are willing to do the work. The Velmont family's healing didn't happen overnight. It required vulnerability, honest conversations, and the courage to risk being hurt again. But the bonds that survived that test were stronger than anything they'd had before. The most powerful lesson is this: people can change, but only if they're willing to face the truth about themselves and commit to becoming better. Caspian didn't just apologize, he transformed. Elias didn't just forgive, he grew. Together, they proved that even the most shattered relationships can be rebuilt on a foundation of truth, humility, and genuine love. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of transformation that will challenge how you see forgiveness, family, and the power of second chances. And tell me in the comments, do you believe people can truly change? Have you ever had to choose between pride and love?